Hello from a member of the NENM Economics, Management, and Finance Club here in Cheongshim International Academy in Gapyeong, South Korea. For today, we'll be discussing market failures and externalities in AP Microecon. So, negative externality. Let's try to consider the case of beef, particularly because there might be some societal costs associated with growing beef, obviously. Apparently, they emit methane, aggravating our climate change problem, and such costs aren't well captured when you're only looking at them from a point of view of the suppliers or the consumers. And that is the key concept of a negative externality. Let's take a closer look here. So right over here, you have a demand curve. And that's just really the demand curve coming from the steakhouse cook. So this is the demand curve right here, and you can also view it as like a marginal benefit. So that very first bag that gets produced, the consumer gets a lot of marginal benefit. They really want to get the beef because they could sell steak to their customers. But then each incremental bag after that, the marginal benefit goes lower and lower. And this green curve over here, we've seen this multiple times. This is our supply curve, which we can think of it as our marginal cost curve. To produce the very first bag, the opportunity cost for the very first pounds of beef looks like about $1,000 for one beef. And then it gets higher and higher and higher as you produce more and more bags. And here on the red dot, we have an equivalent price and like an equivalent quantity right at this point. Our equivalent quantity looks like about 2 pieces and like our price about 2,000 per piece. And if this was all the costs and all of the benefits, then this area on the left right over here would show, colored in orange, to show the aggregate total benefit of the ecosystem here that the suppliers and the consumers are getting from this transaction. Marginal benefit higher than marginal cost. This whole area is our total surplus, and we've seen that multiple times. But now let's think about the added cost of the beef that hasn't really been factored into the cost and prices right over there in the graph. So this means that beef has a negative externality. So it's negative because there's a cost associated with the beef that is not being accounted in this situation, that's not being factored into the marginal cost curve right now as the current. You can also have, like, on the other hand, positive externalities, which are a benefit, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Maybe you're talking about like planting more trees, and like the society definitely benefits when more plants or trees are being planted. And let's just say negative externality comes from obvious things. Cows and methane, they exacerbate climate change, and that takes a toll on all of us. And they hire some experts, and this is not an easy thing to do, but it's determined that the negative externality of the beef is about 1,000 per piece. Or another way to think of it, the costs to society and the environment above and beyond the marginal cost of producer is 1,000 per piece. Now, given that, if you assume this statement right over here, and it's not an easy thing to come up with this number, but if we assume that this number is true, then what is the optimal amount of bags to purchase? And what is the optimum amount of bags to produce? And what we are doing when we do produce this much. And to visualize that, let's create a new curve right here. This is the supplier's marginal cost, and let's create another curve that is the supplier plus the society's marginal cost. So that first beef supplier, his opportunity cost is about $1,000. But for society, it's costing another 1,000 on top of the original opportunity cost. So supplier plus society is costing about $2,000 in total, and so we can plot out another curve which can view the supplier plus the societal marginal cost. So now we can think of things in terms of total benefit. That very first chunk of beef, the chef that buys is still getting the benefit. But now, if you think about the net benefit to society, it's not this whole height all the way down to the original opportunity cost. It's just this part right over here. It's the difference between like a 2 and a 1. The marginal net benefit is basically if you take the marginal benefit and you subtract it out of the total marginal cost, including the externalities. And so the next piece, the total cost gets a little higher. The marginal benefit gets a little bit lower. And it makes sense for society. We'll keep getting benefit from this. If you think of the entire ecosystem, we'll keep getting benefit until we hit the equivalent point, the original one over on the right. And once we get past that equivalent point, now when we think holistically, when we think of the environment and the government and our society and all that, now all of a sudden the marginal cost of each incremental unit is higher than the marginal benefit. So if you're to produce beyond that, now you're incurring costs and we're going into deficit. Now we're essentially eating all the way out of like the benefits that we could have gotten. And if you were to produce all the way to our old equivalent point right over here, we're now getting a negative total benefit to society. Or you could say like also a negative total surplus. And we really haven't visualized it this way in the past. It's unusual for us to see that weight lost on like the right side of the equivalent point, but you can also view it that way. So this right zone over here is a negative surplus. And so what you really want, speaking from like a total, like from the real total of our world, and like what you really want to factor in all the cost and benefit of like the beef. The ideal thing if you want to optimize the benefit in society, you want the equivalent price and quantity to be around here. And that leads us to consider the only monetary cost from the supply and demand perspective would in the real world be less efficient for society by basically producing all this excessive quantity. So it's just basically like not the most useful thing to like take all of these like externalities out of the equation. Positive externality, as I mentioned earlier in the video, is called positive because there's a benefit associated with, for example, textbooks that is not being accounted for in this situation, that is not being factored into the marginal cost curve when simply accounting for marginal costs and benefits from the supplier and consumer perspective. To take this into account, let's take a look at the supply-demand graph again. Our curriculum currently looks like 2 textbooks annually at $200. Now, this isn't taking into account the positive externality of textbooks, which enables, like, it's generally known for quality structured instruction, it's known for the benefits of the society, for example, like better trained workforce and a greater tax revenue for the government. Now, these benefits over the annual usage of textbooks come out at like $100 if calculated. Let's assume that. So it is $100 per textbook benefit. So basically, there's $1,000 of benefit above and beyond the benefit that the owner of the textbook gets to himself or herself by having the textbook. In short words, the value creates for the society. So how do we factor that into the calculation? How do you determine if it's right, just given this equilibrium price and quantity, whether we do have the most optimal amount of textbooks for the greatest good? In the last section, having a negative externality, we had an external cost, and so basically we added that cost to the cost curve. Now, since this is a benefit, we can add this to the marginal benefit curve. So essentially, this is the benefit that the buyer of the textbook is getting, and to do that, let's add the benefit that the society is getting. So the society is getting $100 of more benefits. So you'd essentially be taking the demand curve and you're shifting it up by $100. So by doing that, you get a slightly different equilibrium. The equilibrium price goes all the way out here, so now the equilibrium is at $250 and 3 textbooks. So if you're just to let the market happen without factoring in this benefit, we're essentially leaving all those societal benefits off the calculation, off the table essentially. So the total benefit to the supplier and consumer, which used to be the orange shaded region up there, once accounting for the societal benefit, it's going to be this whole region. It's going to include this whole region up there too, essentially bringing the orange area to the light blue shaded area. And the societal benefit that used to be left on the table, the yellow area, the dead weight loss now will have to be used. We need to incentivize it so that optimal quantity produced can be achieved. And so for this, the government can impose something that's called a tax subsidy, essentially giving you $100 more benefit for that. And so you're essentially making sure that the optimal quantity is being produced. You're giving the $100 to the people who are using the textbooks. So essentially, all of this becomes their benefit as well because they're going to get the $100. And the good thing is that at least the positive surplus is going to be getting to someone that's actually participating in the trade. it's not being lost, you're not being given it up, it's not being in the dead weight loss, and it's actually being accounted for, and it's actually being like used in the calculation so that the optimal quantity can essentially be produced.